Lecture 9 is devoted to the discussion of such syntactic problems as the notion of syntax, sentence as the main unit of syntax, word groups, and syntactic bonds between words. In the second part of the lecture, we'll analyze communicative structure of a sentence. In the first lecture of our course, we mentioned that when you know a language, you can speak and be understood by others who know the same language. That the knowledge of a language enables us to combine words to form phrases and phrases to form sentences. But not every string of words constitutes a well-formed sentence in a language. Therefore, in addition to knowing the words, linguistic knowledge includes the rules for combining words to form sentences and make our own judgments. These rules must be limited in length and number so that they can be stored in our brains. Yet, they must permit us to form and understand an infinite set of new sentences never heard or spoken before. Our ability to speak and understand and to make judgments about the well-formedness of a sentence reveals our knowledge of the grammar of our language. We have also discussed the notion of grammar and indicated that this term derives from Greek and it means arts of letters, as in Greek the word grammar had the meaning of a letter. Grammar implies the study of morphology and syntax. We have already analyzed the subject of morphology and discussed its main problems. This time, we are going to talk about syntax and determine its subject. In university grammar textbooks, syntax is defined as a branch of grammar that studies a sentence construction, its communicative, functional, structural, and pragmatic classifications, as well as its informative organization via functional sentence perspective theory. Therefore, a sentence is both the main unit and the subject of syntax as part of the grammatical theory. What is a sentence? When we speak or write, we convey our thoughts through sentences. A sentence is the smallest unit which is capable of performing a communication, transmitting some kind of information. With the help of a sentence, we can make a statement like London is the capital of the UK, or command or request like wash your hands before eating, or ask a question. Have you ever been to Paris? In written language, a sentence is a string of words standing between an initial capital letter and the mark of punctuation at the end, while in spoken language, a sentence is marked by a certain intonation. The sentence, as a lingual sign, is based on predication, in the center of which stands a finite verb. Due to this feature, the sentence can perform two essential functions. Designating function, which implies referring to a target extra-linguistic situation or event, and communicative function, which implies transmitting some kind of information. The sentence, as a lingual sign, designates a situation or event that includes a certain process as its dynamic center, the agent and the objects of the process, and also various conditions and circumstances of its realization. This content of the target event forms the basis for the traditional syntactic division of the sentence into its functional parts. Therefore, a sentence is not just a jumble of words or word groups. It is a structure in which words are arranged to relate and reflect a target situation or event. A sentence is made up of the subject and the predicate, which are its main parts, and words which complete or modify the subject and the predicate, or the whole sentence. That's secondary parts of the sentence. The subject and the predicate are immediate constituents of the sentence, and there is a concord between them. The subject determines the person and number of the predicate, while the predicate ascribes some action, process, or state to the subject. Most of English sentences contain both a subject and a predicate, forming two-member sentences. The predicate is always explicated by a finite form of the verb or verb phrases. It is normally present in all clauses, including imperative sentences where the subject is typically absent. The verb with its semantics determines what other elements apart from the subject may or must occur in the clause. The subject is typically a noun phrase or a pronoun in the nominative case, which normally occurs before the verb in declarative sentences. For instance, my brother bought a new car on Sunday, and after the auxiliary verb in yes-no interrogative sentences. For instance, do you speak English? The subject determines the number and person of the verb, which is particularly clear with the verb be, the only conjugated verb in modern English. I am, you are, he is, we are, and third person singular present tense of other verbs. For instance, my father works at this factory. There are sentences in which no participant, agent, or experiencer is required. In such cases, the subject position may be assumed by the formal or dummy id, which is devoid of semantic content, that's lexical meaning, and only replaces subject position in a sentence structure. The formal id mainly occurs in sentences signifying time. For instance, it's morning, it's 9 o'clock, it's cold, atmospheric conditions, it's getting dark, it's raining, and distance. It is not very far to New York, or it's just one more stop to Toronto. The secondary parts of the sentence, that is, object, attribute, and adverbial modifiers, modify either the main and the secondary parts of the sentence or the whole sentence. The secondary parts of the sentence differ from the principal ones inasmuch as they are not capable of forming a sentence by themselves. Any of the secondary parts might be removed from the sentence without destroying it. For instance, if we remove the secondary parts from the sentence, he often studies at the library, will get a kernel sentence, he often studies. While the removal of the subject and the predicate, will destroy the sentence. For instance, studies at the library is not a sentence, but a word group. The syntactical characteristics of the secondary parts of the sentence are not as definite as those of the principal ones. Their classification is based on grammatical and semantic criteria. The object is typically a noun phrase or a pronoun in the objective case denoting a thing or a person which is grammatically connected with the verb, modifying it. The object usually follows the verb, and if both objects are present, the indirect object normally comes before the direct one. For instance, Justin poured David some whiskey is more frequent in English than Justin poured some whiskey to David. The object may generally become the subject of the corresponding passive sentence, as in this case, David was poured some whiskey by Justin. The attribute is a secondary part of the sentence, which modifies an entity expressed by a head noun. For instance, a beautiful girl, a deep river, a clever boy, a broken glass, etc. The adverbials modify the verbal predicate denoting either external relations such as time, place, reason, purpose, etc., or inner qualities of the actions and processes such as manner, degree, and so on. There are some formal differences between the adverbials and objects. First, adverbials of external relations may modify the whole sentence, while objects are grammatically connected only with the verb. Second, objects make the grammatical structure of the sentence complete, whereas adverbial modifiers are usually used to make the meaning of the sentence complete. Finally, the position of the object is fixed in English. It follows the verb, while adverbial modifiers, especially adverbials of external relations, are relatively free as to their position in the sentence. For example, you may say, I met a friend of mine on the way to the college, or on the way to the college, I met a friend of mine. Thus, a certain sentence is a certain structure built up of elements, some of which are obligatory for the sentence, while others are optional, for they may be removed away without destroying the sentence as a grammatical structure. By removing optional elements, we arrive at the basic, elementary or kernel sentence. For instance, if we remove such elements from the following sentence, from this moment Psalms began almost unconsciously to read the book, we get the kernel sentence, Psalms began to read the book. No matter how long a sentence might be, one can always arrive at its base, and basic sentences constitute a rather limited number of sentence types in modern English. Now we'll discuss word groups and syntactic bonds between words. A sentence is built up of words and word groups. A word group is a unit formed by a combination of two or more notional words which does not constitute a sentence. A word group differs from a sentence inasmuch as it does not perform a communication. A word group as such has no intonation, intonation being one of the most important properties of a sentence. In this sentence, a week of heavy reading had passed since that evening. There are the following word groups. A week of heavy reading, which constitutes a noun group, and had passed since that evening, which is a verb group. Grammar is concerned with three syntactical word groups formed each time anew, and is not concerned with phraseological phrases belonging to the vocabulary of a language. For instance, An interesting book, or to run quickly, are free word groups, while first aid or to take the floor represent set phrases of the English language. There are three main types of syntactic connections, that's bonds between words: subordination, coordination, and predication. Accordingly, word groups in modern English are classified into the subordinate, coordinate, and predicative types. Subordinate word groups consist of words which are syntactically unequal, since one of the constituent elements, called the head, is modified by a dependent element called an adjunct. Due to this feature, subordinate word groups can be called dominational groups. Subordinate connection is achieved by different classes of words, prepositions, and word order. For instance, in the phrase a pretty girl, a girl is a head word and pretty is an adjunct modifying the head word. Whereas in the phrase a book of stories, a book is a head word and of stories represents a prepositional adjunct. The head and the adjunct of a subordinate word group are its immediate constituents. The head is that part of a subordinate word group which can replace the whole word group in a sentence. The adjunct is the part of the subordinate word group which cannot be substituted for the head. According to the head, subordinate word groups can be classified into the following types. Noun groups, for instance, a sleepless night; verb groups, for instance, to work hard; adjective groups, for instance, extremely clever; adverb groups, for instance, quite near, very quickly; and pronoun groups, for instance, some of the students. Of these, noun groups and word groups are the most widespread types of word groups in English. According to the structure, subordinate word groups are classified into simple unextended word groups consisting of two notional words, such as an interesting book, very tired, etc., etc., and complex extended word groups comprising more than two notional words: a very interesting book, to work pretty hard, etc. Coordinate word groups comprise elements which have the same syntactic functions, being related to one another on the equal rank. Depending on this feature, this kind of word groups can be called equipotent. For instance, such groups are Nick and John, day and night, came and went, tired but happy, etc. Predicative word groups are formed by a combination of a noun or pronoun in the objective case and a non-finite verbal form reflecting the subject-predicate logical relationship. For instance, in the sentence, I saw him crossing the street, him crossing the street is a predicative word group in the function of a complex object. In the sentence, they got into the car and drove away, the dog running after them barking, the dog running after them barking represents a predicative word group in the function of adverbial modifier of attending circumstances. Now, I have already mentioned that in the second part we'll discuss the analysis of communicative structure of the sentence. The theory that studies the communicative structure of the sentence is called functional sentence perspective, originally known as the actual division of the sentence. It was worked out by the scholars of the Prague Linguistic School. The purpose of the functional sentence perspective is to reveal the correlative significance of the sentence parts from the point of view of their informative role in the utterance. That's the immediate semantic contribution they make to the total information conveyed by the sentence in the context of connected speech. In other words, functional sentence perspective exposes its informative or communicative structure. The essence of the functional sentence perspective theory lies in the following fact. When one speaks or writes, one conveys information which is organized into the communicative structure of the sentence, the main components of which are the theme and the rhyme. The theme represents the starting point of the utterance, denoting the entity or the phenomenon about which something is reported, while the rhyme represents the basic informative part of the communication, that's what is said in connection with the theme. For instance, in the newspaper headline, Prime Minister of Georgia opened a car fair, Prime Minister of Georgia represents the rhyme of the message, focusing on the person about whom some news is reported, while opened a car fair is already the rhyme which contains a piece of new information in connection with the theme. On the other hand, the theme-rhyme division of the sentence is connected with its informative dynamics. It is the case when the speaker assumes that some of the information is new, for it is the information he or she is introducing for the first time. This implies that part of the information in the sentence is already shared by the communicants from the context at the time the sentence is uttered. This shared or given piece of information is represented by the theme, while the new information is introduced by the rhyme. Therefore, the theme can be defined as the starting point of the utterance about which something is reported and which is known in the given situation, while the rhyme is regarded as something new the speaker says about the theme. In English, due to the fixed word order, the actual division of the sentence into the theme and the rhyme mostly coincides with its syntactic division. The theme coincides with the subject of the sentence, while the rhyme coincides either with the whole predicate group or its parts, such as the predicative, the object, and the adverbial. This kind of actual division, when the communicative structure of the sentence coincides with its grammatical, that syntactic structure, is referred to as direct actual division. Let's consider an example which belongs to this type of communicative structure. Max bounded forward to meet Charlie. In this sentence, the theme coincides with the subject Max, while the rhyme coincides with the whole predicate group with its adverbial modifier of purpose and the direct object, bounded forward to meet Charlie. However, the communicative informational structure of the sentence does not always coincide with its syntactic structure. The actual division, in which the rhyme is rendered by the subject and the theme by the predicate or its part, is referred to as reverse actual division. For example, through the open window came the pair of a motor car. Most sentences in English admit the theme-rhyme division. However, there is a number of sentences which convey only new information. These are mainly impersonal sentences with dummy it. For instance, it's raining, it's morning, it's getting dark, there was a lot of war, etc. And passive constructions without the by object in them, the subject used with a zero article in this case. For instance, shop and office windows were smashed, cars were burnt. Among the linguistic means that mark the distinction between the theme and the rhyme, grammarians name such structural elements of the language as word order patterns, intonation contours, constructions with introducers, syntactic patterns of contrastive complexes, articles and other determiners, and constructions with intensifying particles. To specify the rhyme of communication, the following devices are used in English. The rhyme is identified by the indefinite article or indefinite pronouns. For instance, a man walked into the room. Any explanation will suit me. The constructions there is, there are, introduce the rhyme. For instance, there was a sound of footsteps in the entrance, or there are some books on the table. The rhyme is introduced by the emphatic it. It was Laura who had seen him. It was at my mother's that I met them. In passive constructions, the by object identifies the rhyme as the communicative center. For example, I was awakened by a knock at the door. Our house was built by my grandfather. Intensifying particles identify the rhyme, adding emotional coloring to the whole utterance. For instance, even Mr. Brown had a part in the general debate. We were so impressed to see him in this place. Inversion is a means of language identifying the rhyme. We have already indicated that in English, due to the fixed word order, the actual division of the sentence into the theme and the rhyme mostly coincide with its syntactic division into the subject and predicate. However, in other contextual conditions, mainly in emphatic speech, the reverse order of actual division is used, the rhyme preceding the theme. For instance, magic words you are speaking, Nancy, or how well you look. Intonation is the last means of a language we would like to focus on. In oral speech, intonation with its accent patterns presents itself as a universal means of expressing the actual division in all types of contexts, accompanying all other means of marking the rhyme of a communication. For instance, I have bought a dress for mother. The rhyme is a dress being marked by a logical stress. Whereas, in the utterance, I have bought a dress for mother, the rhyme is represented this time by the subject I, on which the logical stress falls. Thus, we have discussed the notion of syntax, focusing on the sentence both as the main unit and the subject of its studies. We have also analyzed the primary and the secondary parts of the sentence, pointing out their functional peculiarities in structuring a sentence. We reviewed different grammatical types of word groups according to the syntactic bonds existing between words within their structure. And finally, we have discussed the communicative structure of this sentence, concentrating on its sim-rim distribution as well as the language means of their identification. Thank you for attention.